Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be looking at this article called Feminist and Post.pdf. Catchy title, right?
Yeah, definitely grabs your attention.
Yeah, we're going to be kind of unpacking the author's perspective on music and culture and specifically how they see it all kind of relating to feminism. They use bands like The Blow and the Minor Birds as their examples.
Cool.
So this should be fun.
Sounds interesting. So the author actually describes themselves as a traditionalist, someone who really loves older musical styles, but they're also drawn to something they call postmodern music.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's almost like they're cut between these two worlds.
Yeah, like I love the classics, but
Yeah.
there's something about this new stuff that's speaking to me. So what is postmodern music? What are we even talking about here?
Well, they describe it as a fusion of modern techniques, but with elements of older genres, like swing, blues, or jazz. Think of a band like Caravan Palace. They're a perfect example.
Oh yeah, I love them.
It's familiar, yet fresh,
Mhm.
creates this unique nostalgic vibe while still feeling current.
You know, like taking the best of both worlds and creating something totally new. And they even compare that to like modern rock bands who try to capture the sound of past eras.
Right.
Like everyone is longing for a time that's gone, but expressing it in different ways.
Exactly. The author argues that both types of music are searching for a world that no longer exists. It's a really intriguing idea.
It is, yeah.
Like this longing for something lost, reflected in the music we create. But then they bring feminism into the mix, and that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay. They talk about bands like The Blow and the Minor Birds as being implicitly feminist,
Yeah.
which is a very specific term, as opposed to like Pussy Riot, who are very explicitly feminist. What's the difference?
So for Low and the Minor Birds, feminism isn't their main message or driving force. They're artists, first and foremost, but their feminist perspectives definitely color their music. It's subtle,
Yeah.
but it's definitely present.
Okay, so it's not like they're shouting it from the rooftops, but it's kind of woven into the fabric of their art.
Exactly.
Like you have to listen a little closer.
Right.
Read between the lines a little bit.
The author sees these groups as representing a less extreme form of feminism,
Yeah.
more aligned with second-wave feminism than the more radical third-wave feminism that you see with a group like Pussy Riot.
Okay. But now here's where it gets a little spicy, because the author also has some strong opinions about feminism in general, even in its less extreme forms.
Yeah. They argue that it's harmful, that it rebels against what they call the natural order, and they use the Blow's music as a case study.
Okay, so they point to themes of failed relationships, what they call pseudo or explicitly lesbianic content, and just a general sense that something is off.
Yeah,
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
it is. But even with this critique, the author admits to enjoying the music. They describe it as melancholic, full of longing for something that can never be.
So they're hearing a deep sadness in the music,
Yeah.
and they're connecting that directly to these feminist ideals.
They even go so far as to say that the lead singer of The Blow, based on her demeanor and live performances, appears unhappy as a consequence of her beliefs.
Wow, okay, so they're basically saying that you can hear the effects of this ideology in the music itself.
Right, and this is where they start to connect these ideas to a larger cultural decline. They believe feminism and postmodernism work together, each one feeding off the other.
Okay, so it's not just about the music anymore, but about the bigger picture, how these trends are potentially impacting society as a whole.
Exactly. They see both feminism and postmodernism as forces that chip away at traditional Western institutions, particularly those with Christian roots.
And they tie this back to the music, calling it soulless, like the decline of culture is mirrored in the art being produced, especially this postmodern music.
They even go as far as to say all has been done in music and art, meaning there's no real originality left. All we can do is mix and match techniques from the past.
So they're painting a pretty bleak picture here. Creativity has hit a dead end. We're just stuck, recycling the past.
That's one way to look at it. They believe this lack of originality does not bode well for our culture.
Okay, so we've got this tangled web of ideas, postmodern music, implicit feminism, and a critique of it all as potentially harmful to society. Where do we even go from here?
I think it's worth pausing here to consider what stands out to you in all of this, what resonates with you, and what perhaps challenges your own thinking about music, feminism, and culture.
Yeah. That's a great point. We've thrown a lot at you. Take a moment to process it all, and we'll come back and
Yeah.
dig even deeper into these ideas.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider, that's for sure. And I think the author does raise some thought-provoking points about how art can reflect what's happening in society.
Yeah, if the music feels off, maybe it's a sign that something deeper is off in the culture itself. It's a pretty heavy idea.
It is. And whether or not you agree with their take on specific bands or genres is up to you. But I do think it's worth pondering this connection
Yeah.
between what we create and the world we live in.
Yeah, totally. It makes you wonder about the artist's role in all of this. Are they just reflecting what's already there? Or can they actually shape the culture through their art?
Right? That's the million-dollar question, and I think the author is wrestling with that too. On the one hand, they seem to suggest that artists like the blow are almost victims of their own ideology, like their music is
Yeah.
inherently sad.
Because of their feminist beliefs.
So those beliefs are holding them back creatively, preventing them from creating something truly joyful or fulfilling.
Yeah, that's what they seem to be implying. But at the same time, they acknowledge that these artists are talented and capable of creating genuine works of art. So it's a bit of a contradiction.
It is. Yeah, and it makes me think about how we interpret art in general. Is it fair to assume that an artist's personal beliefs or experiences
Yeah.
will always be reflected in their work?
That's a tricky one. It's natural to try and find meaning, connect the dots, especially
Right.
when art touches on personal themes like relationships, identity, or social issues, but it's not always that straightforward.
Right. And going back to that word soulless, which the author uses to describe this postmodern music, it's almost like they're saying it lacks a certain depth or emotional honesty, like it's all surface and no substance.
Yeah.
Right. It definitely ties back to their larger critique of postmodernism.
Yeah.
They seem to see it as inherently disconnected from tradition, history, from a sense of meaning that they believe is essential to true art.
So for them, it's not just about the music itself,
Yeah.
but about the whole worldview that they believe is behind it.
Yes. And that's where their perspective gets controversial, even if it is thought-provoking.
Totally, because they're basically saying that certain ways of thinking can actually damage the quality, the soul of art.
Yeah. It's a slippery slope for sure. Who gets to decide?
Yeah.
What's soulful and what isn't? What are the rules?
Yeah.
And isn't art supposed to be subjective?
Right. These are great questions. And it makes you wonder about the author's own biases. How much is their interpretation of the music shaped by their own personal worldview?
That's always something to keep in mind. We all see the world
Mm.
through our own lenses. And the author is clearly coming at this from a very specific perspective, one rooted in traditional values and a critique of modern trends.
And to be fair, they do say up front that they're a traditionalist who prefers older music. They're not trying to hide where they're coming from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're laying their cards on the table. But it still makes you wonder if their critique is truly objective.
Right. Is it really about the music, or is it more about their own beliefs? It's something to think about as you listen to these bands for yourself.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that critical thinking is so important, especially when we're dealing with analysis or commentary, and especially when it comes to something as subjective as art.
And remember, there are always multiple perspectives. What might sound soulless to one person could be deeply moving to someone else.
It all comes down to what resonates with you, the listener. We all bring our own experiences and values to the table when we engage with art, and that shapes how we interpret it.
Exactly. And that's what makes art so powerful. It sparks conversations, challenges our assumptions, and connects us to something bigger than ourselves, even when we disagree with.
The artist
Oh,
or the
okay.
critic. Beautifully said. Okay, so we've tackled postmodern music, feminism, and the author's critique. But they also bring up this idea that all has been done in music and art.
Right. That's a bold statement. It's almost like they're saying, there's nothing new under the sun, that we're just rehashing what's come before. Kind of depressing thought.
It is. It's definitely a provocative statement. And it does suggest a certain sense of exhaustion, a feeling that creativity has reached its limits.
And they see this as a negative thing, a sign that culture is stagnating, maybe even going backwards.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to consider this in the context of postmodernism, which
That's
often
it.
embraces this idea of blending genres and reinterpreting past forms.
So it's like they're saying that postmodernism is inherently limited because it's always looking backward instead of forward.
And that leads us to a really interesting question. If everything has already been done, where do we go from here? What does the future hold for creative expression?
Right. Are we doomed to just keep remixing the past forever? Or is there still room for genuine innovation and originality?
That's the question that artists have been grappling with for centuries. and it's one that we'll continue to debate as we move further into the 21st century.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing, actually. Like, is there a limit to human creativity, or are there still uncharted territories waiting to be discovered?
That's the million-dollar question. And there's no easy answer. But I think the fact that we're even asking the question means we haven't given up on the search for new forms of expression.
That's a hopeful thought. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Postmodern music, feminism, the author's critique, and this idea that everything has already been done. What's next? Let's circle back to the Blow and the Mynah Birds for a second. The author describes their music as melancholic, like there's this sense of unfulfilled longing woven into the sound.
Yeah, and they connect that directly back to their critique of feminism, arguing that this ideology ultimately leads to unhappiness and a sense of something being fundamentally off, both in the music and maybe even in the lives of the artists themselves.
It's like they're hearing what they want to hear, right? Or maybe projecting their own beliefs onto the music because it fits into their worldview.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And it just highlights how important it is to be aware of our own biases when we're trying to analyze or interpret art. You know, we all come to the table with our own perspectives.
So how do we separate the art from the artist, so to speak? Or is that even possible?
Ooh, that's a tough one. An artist's personal beliefs and experiences
Yeah.
are bound to influence their work. But that doesn't mean the art is solely a reflection of those beliefs. Art can be so much more multi-layered than that.
Right. There's always room for interpretation, for
Exactly.
multiple readings, for different perspectives. That's part of what makes art so engaging.
Exactly. And that's what makes art so fascinating. It's not always about finding the right answer. It's about engaging with the work, asking questions,
Yeah.
and letting it challenge your assumptions.
So maybe the author is right. Maybe there is a sadness or a longing in the music of the Blow and the Mynah Birds, but maybe there's also a whole lot more going on that they're not picking up on because of their own perspective.
Absolutely. There could be other layers of meaning there, other interpretations that are just as valid, just as meaningful, even if they don't line up with the author's viewpoint.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of art, you know?
Yeah.
It speaks to each of us in different ways.
Yeah, it reminds me that there's always something new to discover in art. It's not static, it's alive, and it keeps evolving as we engage with it.
I love that.
Oh?
Art is alive. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've explored some pretty complex ideas. Postmodern music, feminism, the interplay of art and culture, and the role of the artist.
It's been a whirlwind.
Hopefully, it's giving you, our listener, a lot to think about.
As you continue exploring music and art, remember to keep the author's perspective in mind, but don't be afraid to challenge it, question it, and find your own meaning in what you experience.
Because at the end of the day, the most powerful art is the art that speaks to you on a personal level, regardless of the artist's intentions or any critic's interpretation.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep listening.